Hi, Rhonda. How are you?
Hey, Robin, it's so good to see you again. Thank you for your time. I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Me too. I know we've tried to do this once or twice, and in our crazy, chaotic world that we are here to talk about,
Yes.
we've had to reschedule. But thanks for your commitment to it, and your story is amazing, and I'm really excited to share it with anybody who's here watching. So let's dive in. Let me do this. I'm going to spend a moment and I'm going to just share an introduction so everybody gets to know a little bit about your journey, like I have, which is just amazing. And we'll do that. And then we'll just hop into it and get to it.
Sounds great. Let's do it.
All right, let's do it. So, for all of you watching, Rhonda has spent her career working in large multi-state organizations in the field of organizational development, driving organizational effectiveness, and implementing systematic programs and processes. And for the past 30 years, she has worked in highly regulated industries, which creates its own challenge, ranging from nuclear generation, pharmaceutical, manufacturing, oil and gas, healthcare, financial services, and all through this, her focus has been on crafting and engaging culture that is releasing human potential, which I love, and through that human potential, elevating organizational performance. Um, Rhonda, I think, is self-described, and what I have learned about her as well is described as a cultural ambassador and really aligning herself with high-performing, people-centric organizations. Um, and specifically, and many of these organizations have been really with a purpose at the end of it and doing good for the larger bit of humanity. So currently, she's serving as a strategic partner to the CEO and board of directors and aligning the organizational strategy with rewards and metrics. So just a little bit you've done, just a couple little things along the way. So let's dive in. Let's dig in. I would love to hear, I know in our first conversation, the thing that stuck out most to me and that I will hear forever when I see you is just how important it is for you to be in a values-based organization and a purpose-driven organization. Um, and I'm curious, when we talk about your journey and how you got to where you were, like I'd love to understand how that's been a thread through your journey and really how you got to that point where you knew that was something super important for you.
Yeah, so Robin, it has been a thread in my career, and it's not where I started, but once I found it, it's what I demanded, quite honestly, in my employers, and it led my choices that I made professionally for the rest of my career. And I
How did you find it?
truly,
I'm totally going to interrupt because I don't
yeah,
want to
no,
skip
that's
to that.
great.
But how did you, so when in your career did you realize it and how did you find it? I just don't want to skip that over because I feel like it's so important.
You know what? I found it. I'm so lucky. I found it early in my career. It was my third employer. So I was about, I guess, 8 years into my professional career by then. I was just starting with my third employer, and it was Johnson and Johnson. And it was Ortho McNeil Pharmaceuticals for J&J. And I was introduced to J&J's Credo. And that credo and the way that J&J used it um, to truly test whether the decisions that were being made by the core leaders within that organization, the senior leaders within the organization, upheld their commitment to the people that they served. And it was life altering for me. And I think part of that was because I worked for a great female leader. And part of that was just seeing an organization take values that were important to them and apply them to their decision making and to really use it as a litmus test of, are we upholding the values that we have on the wall?
And it was lived from the top all the way through the
Yes,
organization, I'm assuming, from
it
the
was.
describing it, which is such a key differentiator,
It
right?
is.
As you know, as a learning leader, but if it's not coming and being lived by the top, it's not being lived at the bottom.
So I had multiple opportunities to join other organizations, but when I would stop and look and do my own litmus test, my own credo of what's important to me, and does this organization espouse and actually live those similar values? I've only joined the ones that I can say yes to. where that passed my litmus test, that passed my credo. So it's something I will forever thank, J&J for introducing me to. And I do have to say the one part of that introduction that bothers me the most that you did is that whole concept of 30 years. Can we just, because, oh my God, it's true. It's been actually over 30 years that I've been doing this line of work. But at the same time, when I hear those numbers, I think, oh, where has the time gone?
Yeah, it's so funny, Rhonda. I was just having this conversation yesterday around the breakfast table and with my brother, and he's a doctor, and we were talking about this. And I said, when I tell people that I've been doing this for 30 years, but I still think I'm 30 years old, it's really confusing. And the math is really confusing. And he was
Especially to
actually,
me.
yeah, right? And he was actually explaining to me that it's like we almost mature in um sections. It's like, so once you graduate, you're on this upward trajectory, and then between like 18 and 30, you're just a young adult. And whether you're 22 or 24 or 28, like you're kind of just like finding yourself. And so you sort of live in this age group. And then you have, for those people, I shouldn't say when you have, for those people who have children,
Right.
you're living in this growth trajectory of having children, and you're just deep in this parenthood world. And whether you are 28, 30, 40, 50, you're kind of the same age through all of that. And then once your kids get to this point where they're more freedom and you're an empty nester, or your kids are driving, and then all of a sudden you're at the next step. But you really don't actually feel you're aging again until you really feel old, like later on. Like some people that's 80, some people it's 70, some people it's 90, but then you kind of say, and I was fascinated. I've never.
I love that concept. And absolutely it can ring true for me. So
So I understand. I see it the same way you do. We just went off the topic, but it was fascinating and so relevant.
of
So tell
course.
me this, I find that as I speak with a lot of people and 30 years of placing people in jobs, right? We do our best to ask the right questions. And what I find is people who are so diligent about not wanting to make a mistake again and asking the right questions and getting in, and yet mistakes are made because maybe a company doesn't really share everything, or maybe they just didn't dive deep enough. What is it that you have done or questions that you've asked to really dive into whether that company is going to uphold the values that are so critical for you to join an organization?
One of the questions I love to ask when I am looking or checking out, test driving another organization and considering making a career move, I love to ask them, how are decisions made here? And so if I'm joining an executive team, for example, tell me about how decisions are made by the executive team. Tell me about how much time does the executive team spend together? And they'll say, oh, we spend an hour together. Great. Is that structured or unstructured time? Oh, you spend an hour together of structured time. How much unstructured time do you spend together? I'll also ask about things like, where's the executive team located? Are they located together? And is it kind of just, how does the organization view that space? Is that the ivory tower and you're silent when you walk in? Or is it a playful space that everyone comes to and everyone feels welcome? So those are just some of the questions that I will ask to get at, how do they truly live? How do
Mm,
they behave? Because it's one thing to have the best intentions, but if behaviors don't match those intentions, then the intentions don't matter.
yeah, yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah,
Have you ever made a mistake and
I
not asked
have.
the right question?
I have.
And what happened? Like, what do you, when you look back in retrospect?
Yeah.
Because I think there's always, I think it's such a good lesson for people, right? And especially we talk about there's camaraderie amongst female leaders who have arrived at leadership and all of the issues women go through kind of as leaders. And then there's also the concept of our rising leaders is as females. And when you think about that mistake, even though there's no mistake, I just believe
Right.
there's a
It
journey,
was
right?
a wonderful learning opportunity.
Okay, a great learning opportunity. When you look back at that and think, what happened? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it was actually an internal promotion opportunity for me that I stepped into. And so it was a known entity that I was going to be reporting into in an organization that I knew the organization's culture and I knew the organization's values. And I truly believe that the organization did and does live those values. However, there are times that you have individuals within that organization who are not as aligned. And that was the case here, is while I anticipated that the values may not have been as aligned as I would have liked, I also didn't realize how far apart from the organizational values they were. And so when I stepped into that, took a promotional opportunity and for internal growth, um, it was a huge learning. Truly, I learned so much
And
from
was there
those 3.
something you could have done differently to have or asked in that moment? Like if you were like, oh, I should have just asked this. Was there anything like that?
I think I should have spent more time with the person who vacated the role
Okay.
to inquire a little deeper beyond what they were willing to say publicly about their departure. I think had I taken them out for a cup of coffee and said, "Hey, I'm considering applying for your role. What would you tell me?" That would have been absolutely what I should have done. And I didn't.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was so focused on that next step, that next rung. It was a title, it was a level of scope that I had wanted and I thought I was ready for. And I agree, I was ready for, but I wasn't ready to work for that person.
Mm. And so again, thank you for the natural transition into this next realm is is when you if you were to pass on advice to people that are in the growth trajectory part of their career and wanting to check different boxes, whatever that may be. It might be supporting a different department, it may be just getting to the manager level, director level, VP level. What advice would you give to somebody to make sure they are looking at what as they continue to grow? Because it's not just, it sounds like what you're saying is it's not just about what the job is, but there's the, is it right for you? And what is that? And is it the right place? So I'm just curious what your thoughts are around that. 'Cause
Robin, to me, it's twofold. Number one is I do believe you can do anything for a year. And I have lived my career that way. I can do anything for a year.
yeah,
I can work for a bad boss for a year. I can work for an organization that I don't have a cultural alignment for a year. But I need to go into it very honestly with myself that this is a year and I'm taking it for this reason. And this reason is going to give me what as an outcome, because it's definitely going to cost me something for this year. It may
yeah,
cost me to set my values aside. It may cost me work-life balance. It may cost me um, a toxic whatever. Um, so I do think you can do anything for a year. That being said, to actually answer the question you asked, is what advice would I give? I would say have that discernment discussion with yourself. Literally do the plus deltas, right? And I cannot tell you how many times I do that. Just a basic plus delta. What are the positives if I make this move? What are the negatives if I make this move? What are the positives if I go for this role? Because I will say that when you're an internal candidate, especially if you're in a large complex organization, putting your hat in the ring for another role and the potential of you not getting it. A lot of times we won't put our hat in the ring for another role because we don't want to burn the bridge we're currently standing on.
yeah,
And again, I think that you've got to do some discernment there about what are the pluses and what are the deltas. What are the risks that you would be taking, but what's the opportunity that's available to you? And if the opportunity outweighs the risk, don't be afraid to do it.
yeah, yeah. And
Don't be afraid to
the
do it.
fear can be so real.
The
And I think,
fear can be overpowering at times.
and I think there's so many people. I mean, I know just again in interviewing for a bazillion years at this point, that as I talk to people, or even just friends who come to me for coaching advice and career advice and what have you, it's, but I don't want people to find out internally, or I don't want to burn the bridge. I mean, that is such a common thread that I feel like it's really important for us to like pause for a moment on that and say, how do we address that? Because so many people, and as the head of HR, in a larger organization, are people at risk of burning bridges because they apply within, or is it looked at in a certain different way? What advice would you give to people that are facing those moments where, in order to grow, they have to put themselves out there, but they're afraid to burn a bridge? What's the advice you'd give?
The advice I would give is, if you are not upfront about it, they're going to find out anyway. So how do you want them to find out? From you or from someone else?
Yeah.
And so I'm a firm believer in, if you're going to put your hat in the ring in a large organization for a different role, even if it's a lateral, because sometimes you've got to step aside to step up. Sometimes you're blocked where you are, the person in front of you is a high performer and they're 8 years older than you are. Well, they're not leaving anytime soon. So
Right.
you're really blocked there. In order to take a step up within the organization, you may have to step to the side and then make your step up. I'm a firm believer in having that candid, transparent conversation with the person that you report to, saying, this is not about you, this is about me. This
Yeah.
is about my growth, my career aspirations, and I would love your support as I'm looking to grow myself. Um, I think 9 times out of 10, they are going to be grateful that you approach them, and they truly will support you in growing your career, even if it's not for that role that you're thinking about applying for, because they may have insights that you don't have. They may be able to say, you don't want it. The guy you're going to be reporting to is a real jerk.
Yeah.
But think about this role, or I actually think you would be fantastic in this area. Let me open some doors for you there. So in those large, complex organizations, when you let someone know that you want to grow, most times the response is, let me be helpful.
I
And
think people want to be helpful, like, right? I think most people want to be helpful,
that's right.
but what if they are with that boss that doesn't want to be helpful?
And if you're with a boss that doesn't want to be helpful, how long are you willing to stay? Are you willing, that plus delta, are you willing to risk it? Are you willing to say, my career growth, and quite honestly, my investment in me is worth taking this risk? I'm still going to have that honest, transparent conversation. I'm not going to make it about them. I'm going to make it about me. I'm going to ask for their support in my growth. But if they're not going to support my growth and support investing in me, then why am I staying?
Yeah.
And that's the question we
It,
have to ask ourselves.
it's so true, because I think, again, it's fear is major, and I think especially, I think it probably gets easier as we grow in our careers and we've had more experiences and you've seen what works and what doesn't. But I'd say especially earlier career individuals,
It's true.
it can be really scary, and you don't know who to trust and who not to trust. And but yet I think it's always what you said, which is balancing the, but how long are you willing to stay? If you don't trust that person, then what is the bigger question that you should be asking yourself in that moment, versus just sitting idly in that fear and not progressing your career, if that's something that you really would like in your career.
I had mentioned earlier about the one mistake I had made, and in particular, where I didn't do the due diligence to the level I really feel I should have. And I stayed in that role for 3 years for a number of reasons. My spouse and I were going through, he was doing a career change at that time, and I was the steady income. And we were in a financial kind of dip in the United States at that time, and there were not a lot of other roles in organizational effectiveness or organizational development or organizational performance. And I chose to stay for 3 years while I waited for the economy, while I waited for my spouse to get more stable. And it was the right decision for me at the time, but I'll tell you what, if I could do it again, I still think I would have worked even harder to find a way out, sooner.
Yeah. Yeah, and it is, I went through something similar, although
Mm,
it was my husband that was going through it at the time, and he stayed. And there are times, right? There are times where we have to ask those questions. Is it the right time? And there
sure.
are multiple factors, and it isn't an easy decision. I have a lot of people who come to me and say, but oh my gosh, what do I do? I can't, if I leave this job and then all of a sudden I'm looking for a job without a job, but my parents need me to go and move to XYZ to take care of them for a little while because my mom is ailing. I'm like, okay, let's look at the big picture in all of this, right? We're
Right.
dealing with family. We get one shot at this. So there are times you can and times you can't. And I
That's
think
right.
that there was a great piece of advice I heard many, many years ago, and I always bring people back to this when I'm talking to them or coaching individuals on their career is there a story that makes sense when
Mhm.
you're making that decision? And if you're taking that next job, does the story make sense? So if you're looking at your resume,
That's
can
right.
you create the story? And the story could be, I needed to take care of my family at that time. Great. That makes sense to a lot of people. Maybe
Rowan,
not
I think that's great advice that you provide to people about the story. The second thing I also would say is find a mentor you do not work with every day. Find a mentor who's not at your organization, who can be your trusted advisor, who's that safe place, that sounding board, who over the years will get to know you better in some ways than you even know yourself. And I am lucky enough that in 1990, I found my mentor. And here we are, 2025. I have the same mentor.
Are you serious?
And
Wow.
yes, and Dr. Ralph Goring gave me my first job out of college, and he is still my mentor today. We do a walk and talk, and regardless of where I live in the world, anytime I'm in Austin, Texas, and especially if it's a Saturday, we will do a walk and talk. And that's true today. I live in California today. My husband and my son are still in Texas. We've been doing this for 2 years, so he didn't have to leave his high school, right? The sacrifices that we make as
Yes.
parents, right? Um, but every Saturday or every time I fly into Austin to visit with my husband and my son, I dedicate Saturday mornings to my walk and talk with my mentor. Now, my mentor's 83 and he's still my mentor. And we still do a walk and talk. And what's so lovely about the walk and talk is that it's all of the thoughts and feelings and emotions just kind of go off in the air and you leave them on the trail. But by the time you get back, you have so much clarity around what you were wrestling with. And you had a sounding board who sometimes is just silent, but other times can ask you one question that the light goes on for you. And you just say,
You're like,
wow.
yeah, how'd you know to ask me that question?
Every once in a while, I'll hand him a quarter and say, here's your, here, right from the Schultz's, Lucy had her own psychiatry booth and it was a quarter for visits. And so I would give him my quarter.
Oh, buddy, that's right, and peanuts. And it is such good advice, and I think that especially in the world today where I think a lot of companies are coming back on site, maybe not full time, but in a hybrid fashion. But so many of us have been remote and so many people have been dispersed. And some of those relationships you have to do a lot of work to go get them and ask for them. They're not as obvious as maybe as they once were at some point. And I think it's just such good advice, whether you're remote, whether you're hybrid, whether you're on site, is seeking out that mentorship as you talk to people and not being afraid to ask for. That's such good advice. And I think that'll go a long way. Nobody's given that advice yet. So thank you for that. So I promise that we would not stay here too long, and I know you're incredibly busy, and I promised to keep it to 20-25 minutes, and I think that's where we are. So I'm going to say thank you so much and really appreciate your advice, and I hope people are here to listen to it because, you know, making mistakes are not mistakes, right? They're part of the journey, and finding mentors and asking for help and living in the fear, but going past the fear. I mean, there were so many great topics. So thank you for all of that and sharing and
Always a pleasure to chat with you, Robin. Truly. Thank you for your time. Looking forward to seeing you again soon.
me too. I'll talk to you soon.